AdvoKAYte, holding healthcare accountable. This podcast is my way of sharing what I've learned about the mistakes, the cover-ups, and the ways we can all protect ourselves. We're all in this together. Well, hello, Michelle, and thank you so much for joining me in the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, one thing is that people probably already know who you are because of your work on the Dr. Death cases. And for those that don't know, Michelle was the lead prosecutor, prosecuted the infamous Dr. Death, which landed him in prison for life, where he currently resides.
Yes.
So, but before we jump into it, Michelle, tell me, what were you doing before the Duntsch cases came your way?
Before his cases, I was just doing normal felony stuff. And when you're in felony, you handle everything from drugs to thefts, robberies, murders. And so you just kind of make your way through that system and learn how to best help those kind of victims. And then when Duntsch came up, I was in the white collar crime division.
Okay.
And so in there, I was working more on big employee thefts and cases like that.
And so what did you do before you became a prosecutor?
I went to law school.
So you came there right out of law school?
Yeah, I came right out of law school.
And just tell us, where did you grow up? Where did you go to law school?
I kind of grew up moving around. My parents worked for the government, and so we moved from, I started here in Texas, but then we moved to Washington, D.C. for a while, and then we were in Florida for a while, and then I came back here for law school.
And where'd you go to law school?
Southern Methodist University.
Okay, wonderful.
I loved it. It was a great school.
Yeah.
Very good education. And that's, while I was working there, that's how I got into criminal law, because I was in their criminal defense clinic where you're practicing and learning, how do you do criminal law at all? How do you defend these cases? And from there, I ended up working with a defense attorney who happened to be a special prosecutor on the big Dallas fake drug scandal with the police officers. And so I was just working for him while he was a special prosecutor, and that's how I got interested in prosecuting.
And so since the Duntsch cases, you're still a prosecutor for the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, but I know you have a big title, too. I can't remember what it is.
I don't know about a big title. There's a lot of us, but I am one of the felony chiefs that we have down there. Right now I'm in the Crimes Against Children unit, and so we deal with different types of abuse on children.
Well, that's a tough but a necessary job.
It is. It's definitely, the ones with real victims like Duntsch and the ones with the children where they're truly innocent people. Those are the ones that are the most rewarding. And so I'm enjoying it.
And, when we first met over a decade ago, you were not a mother.
Yes.
And now you are a mother of 2 children.
I am. They're very young. They keep me busy.
Yes. And you were in trial last week.
I was, yeah. Yeah, we had a case that lasted a couple of weeks. Barely saw my kids. They're 2 and 4, and they're just lovely and delightful and bring a lot of joy to my life. But definitely still trying cases all the time.
Well, we talked about this on a prior episode where I was the interviewee, and there are sacrifices. I had small children and would be in trial for weeks at a time, and I'd put them to bed, story time, dinner, story time, homework, whatever, and then I'd get back to work.
Yeah.
Burn the midnight oil, as they say. But it's also such a necessary role. And also, would you say it's fulfilling because you're helping people?
Yeah. I think that's what makes it worth it, right? You don't want to let down the people who need you. They're counting on you to get them justice where they couldn't get it anywhere else. And so, yeah, you have late nights and you work really hard and you're exhausted and you miss out on some things with your own family, but you're also getting to help other people. And I do think my kids understand that. We've explained it to my 4-year-old, and she kind of gets that Mommy's out helping other kids. And I think she kind of likes it.
Your children will be very proud of you when they get old enough to understand what a rock star their mom is. And, I personally am so fond of you, and I respect and admire you so much. And
I admire you too.
Oh, well, that's okay. Podcast is over. But no,
You've done
seriously.
so much. I'm serious. You've done so much.
Well, you changed the course of history. I mean, I think you did something that no one, to my knowledge, has ever done before or since. Getting a life sentence for a doctor. So
Well, he had it coming.
he did.
He did.
He did. And he probably was given many chances to rein himself in, and others were given many chances to rein him in. But, it was as one doctor put it, it was like there was a serial killer loose in Dallas, and it took a long time and a lot of people to stop him. And you were one of those very important people.
Thanks. It is true, though. It was very much a team effort, right? I didn't do it alone. I think you guys started the process over, when the patients were coming to you because they were harmed and needed help, and even just paying for their basic bills. And so I think that really started the process. And then everything that Dr. Henderson and Dr. Kirby did to try and get him stopped. I mean, I think every person who worked on that case to stop him is so important, and they all played different crucial elements. We just kind of wrapped it up at the end.
It was, and we joke because we've stayed in touch all these years, and the band is always getting back together.
Yeah.
Which is you and me and Dr. Henderson and Dr. Lazar, Bob Oshel, who's going to be a guest, as well as we've invited some new people to our band, Ann Roberts.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that a little later, but for none of us did the case stop when our particular jobs were finished. I think, if anything, the Duntsch cases made advocates out of all of us, because we saw that the system that gave us Duntsch can and probably will give us another Duntsch if we don't do something.
Yeah, I mean, we can see it in the media now. They're still coming. I get phone calls from other prosecuting offices wondering, well, how do we deal with this doctor? He's doing similar things. So I just think he has really far-reaching effects that have reverberated throughout, in some aspects, the whole nation. And so getting our group back together, we're just trying to make little changes where we can, make it a little safer for patients.
Yeah, that's right. Well, let's start by talking about how you got involved in the case and why you got involved.
Well, honestly, I just happened to overhear my boss talking about the case. It had just come to her attention, and so I offered to help on it, and then I just took it over because it was so fascinating. Just learn, interesting to learn the medicine and to see what could be done. It was unlike anything that we'd had at our office, and by that point, I'd been at the DA's office for a while, and so I was eager to try something different than what we'd seen before.
And, having been a medical malpractice lawyer for a minute or two at this point, I've seen a lot of things, and others have seen a lot of things where you're just like, that just shocks the conscience. That just can't be. And it's hard enough to hold them responsible, hold a doctor or a hospital responsible in a medical malpractice civil case, where the only thing that can be recovered is financial recovery for your client. But 99.999% of those don't end up on a prosecutor's desk and a criminal prosecution. So what was it about this case that caused you to say, this is a criminal prosecution and this guy needs to be put in prison?
I think there are a lot of things that played into it. When we were first looking at the case, we weren't sure whether or not it was criminal. We needed to investigate. And so, but the more we dug into it and the more patients we talked to and doctors that treated those patients that we talked to, the better we began to understand the scope of what he had done. The patients that he had injured, the odd behaviors that he was engaging in, the things that he had actually done in his surgeries that were super abnormal and not normal, not complications you would expect coming out of the surgery. And so as we investigated all of the patients he'd ever touched, which weren't that many, relative to a lot of other neurosurgeons because he was still new, we realized that he'd hurt almost every single patient in some form or another. And so, at some point you got to stop yourself. You know what you're doing is wrong. And so that where the exact line is of when it became criminal, I think is hard to draw, but he definitely well surpassed that.
Yes. Well, a couple of things on that. And, you know, early on in the case, I would start going in my workup of the cases, I would go to the surgeons that would take over the care of my clients after Duntsch had, ravaged their bodies. And they would say, I've never seen anything like this before. I remember sitting in one doctor's office and I was like, what is the prognosis for this patient? And he said, I don't know. And I thought, well, again, what a smart aleck. Of course you're the doctor. And I was like, okay, very funny. What do you mean you don't know? And he said, I don't know because I've never seen anything like this. I've called around. I've called the Mayo Clinic. I've called Cleveland Clinic. Nobody's ever seen this kind of complication because it just doesn't happen. It's not medicine. Right. It's not in that field, So, Dr. Henderson and Dr. Lazar talking about things like Duntsch lacked a basic orientation to the anatomy. He didn't know if he was in the esophagus or a disc. He didn't know if he was in the bony part of the spine, the vertebra, or out in the musculature.
Yeah.
But
and he often was just working at the wrong level in the body too. He was aiming for one spot and ended up in a totally other spots. That happened regularly.
But what was superimposed on top of this was his detachment from reality. And I want you to tell the story about after Mary Eford's surgery, when he was so completely disoriented, and instead of putting the spinal hardware, affixing it to the bones, he did the whole surgery outside and put this hardware in her muscles and amputated nerve roots and things like that. So, probably everyone else in the operating room knew what was happening because, for one thing, we know there's fluoroscopy and they're taking images all along. Anybody could look up there and go, wait a second, that's not right. But what was Duntsch's reaction when he finished the surgery?
He was actually very excited. He thought he had done a great job, and he put his hands up in kind of like a football goal motioning, with the two arms up on the sides.
Like, woo!
Yeah. Like he just made a big, a touchdown or kicked a good field goal. And he said this word, tricortical, which we've been told is not really a thing, that doesn't exist. And so he was just elated with what he had done. He really thought that he had nailed it.
So one of the great mysteries of all time may be what was really going on in his mind. And I'm asked this question a lot. We have his crazy behavior, which we could talk about for hours, been well documented. And then we have, his late night email rants, and the famous one where he says, I'm a stone cold killer.
Right.
And I'll, F with anybody who gets in my way. And a lot of people took that to mean literally, like at some point did he turn and he literally was trying to kill patients. But I'm really interested in your perspective because you probably know him better than any of us do. Because you got more, you got to listen to his jailhouse conversations. You had a lot of opportunity to observe him.
Yeah. I definitely think I got to just observe who he was more than you guys probably do on a regular basis. He, the email that you referenced, that was actually very early on in his time operating on people. And so we look at that email as an example of his narcissism and, probably it was drug fueled and the things that he was saying. But again, it gave us insight into who he thought he was as a person, who he really believed, what he was doing, what he was building, really believed that thought that he could accomplish all of these things that he was setting out to do, even though he didn't have the skills necessarily to do them. And so I think that email definitely tells you about his personality. It was also pretty obvious when he did his interview with the police that he had still convinced himself that these patients were fine. He was not accepting the fact that these patients were injured. He said, patients who literally still can't feel half their body. He said that, oh, they're, 90% better. They're fine. It's nothing. And he blamed it on the civil attorneys, saying that y'all were just out for him, and he knew that this was coming. And a lot of that, it just shows his mentality of that he really had convinced himself that he was doing great things, and that everybody else was kind of holding him back. And then we listened to his jail calls, where he would talk to his family, and to kind of the different way he would talk to his family versus maybe some friends, and even within the different family members. They seemed like very caring people, and they were there to support him, because obviously he was going through a hard time being in jail. But I did feel like he was still kind of manipulating them with the information he wanted them to have, and just kind of what his plans were for the future. So that just kind of showed me his base personality, I think. And then when you add everything else on top of it, the fact that he's clearly a narcissist, he's probably a sociopath, and then he was adding drugs into the whole mix, just making it all worse. Yeah. That I think just fueled the stuff he was doing in his surgeries. He wasn't willing to admit he was causing these problems. He either didn't see them, didn't recognize them, didn't know them, because he didn't retain that information from his training, or he just was not living in reality of seeing what was happening to these patients, and just thought he was better than all of it.
Well, I do want to follow up on that, but it reminded me of a funny story, and I know I've told you this story before, but, it took several years for the civil cases to play out, and of course he was represented by an attorney, and he was kind of famous for these allegedly cocaine-fueled midnight email rants, and I was the recipient of at least one of those, and it reminded me, because you said how he blamed everything on the civil attorneys. Well, I wish I had saved that and framed it, because it kind of begins with, "You're a hack." He's telling me, he's like, "You're just a hack. You're not a good lawyer. You're ignorant. I have a clue what you're doing. But here's what I'm going to do for you, okay? I'm going to turn on the hospitals, and I'm going to come to work for you. And I don't remember what he wanted. I'll charge you $500 an hour or whatever, and I'll tell you all the secrets of the hospitals, and we're going to take them down together or whatever." And I was like, this is straight up mental. And I sent it to his lawyer, and I was like, please tell him to not contact me anymore. But he sent me another email too, and it was very threatening. And I don't know if he was ever really dangerous in that way or not, but it did prompt me to kind of have one eye over my shoulder, and it prompted us to get a security system for our office.
Yeah.
But, we also saw during the pendency of the cases, and then the pendency of your cases, how he just kind of continued to unravel, right? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, that first email that you mentioned, that sounds a lot like him, right? He really just believed he could do whatever. And yeah, you know what? Let me bring you along, little person.
Right. Yeah.
That sounds just like him. But
Yeah.
as far as, his behavior did become a lot more erratic after, obviously it was declining while he was operating, but once he gave up his license, a lot of things just went downhill in his life. There were incidents where he had a kind of mental health crisis and was banging on a door at a bank at early hours in the morning, saying he needed to get in. And then there were problems with the mother of his child at the time, and things that were going on in their lives. He went to Walmart at one point and stole a bunch of things from Walmart. They have really good videos, and so you can watch him put on a hat and pull on the pants and get the shopping cart and put fill up the Walmart bags and just walk right out. And it's just very kind of strange, erratic things. And it was not like it was stuff that he necessarily needed. So there's just a continual decline in all of his behaviors and what he's doing after his license is pulled.
Well, the other thing that you mentioned was, did he get good training and then, because of drugs or mental illness or whatever, he forgot his training? And this is, another one of the ongoing debates is, did he, because we know that the residency program where he graduated from, it is a prestigious residency program. But what did you uncover about what caused him to be dangerous? Like from the day he hit Dallas-Fort Worth, he was dangerous. He wasn't competent to perform surgeries. He wasn't mentally competent to make good decisions about the appropriateness of surgery, aftercare. So, was he competent when he left Tennessee? And in the time it took him to get from Tennessee to Dallas, he suddenly became incompetent? Or, what happened to him?
Yeah, I don't know that I could speak to what happened to him. We certainly investigated the training, and he went through the programming in the schools like he was supposed to. He had excellent people training him, and they indicated, that they had taught him all the things he needed to know, So I don't know if he just wasn't able to retain that information, or maybe his brain wasn't working right because of his extracurricular activities. Maybe that was some of it. We did try to determine whether, he had plenty of surgeries when he was doing his training, and we weren't ultimately able to get a lot of information on that. Certainly he had enough to get out of the program according to their qualifications. And then also we weren't able to get any of those records. They're highly protected, and understandable to some degree, but they are highly protected. And so we tried a different route where we went from his resume and found all the hospitals where he said that he had privileges when he was in Tennessee. And we ordered records from those hospitals to try and figure out, how many surgeries he had been in, and what he had been doing in those surgeries. And I think ultimately we counted, 80 to 100 where he was listed on the records that we could find. But we were also told that there could be a lot of records where he's maybe not listed as having been in the surgery too. So I think ultimately it was difficult to determine what he had been doing in his training, but everybody seemed to indicate he would have known all of these things. He would have been taught appropriately. He would have known what he was doing. And so I don't know what caused the problem between when he got to Dallas and was just unable to actually perform those surgeries, do it with his actual hands. I don't know what happened there.
Right. And, so many stories early on. His first job in Dallas, the doctor that hired him there, literally one of the very first surgeries he did here, he left and went to Vegas while his patient was still in the hospital. And finally, the nurses called the doctor that hired him, and they were like, "Where is he? We haven't seen him. His patient has not languishing up here in the hospital for days and hasn't even seen a doctor." Mm-hmm. And that doctor reaches Duntsch, and Duntsch was like, "It was all good. I was coming back I was just in Vegas for the weekend. I was coming back on Monday." And of course, there's that famous story about how he was laying on the luggage
conveyor belt,
the conveyor belt, at the airport, which would be crazy if you saw it from somebody that went to Vegas and had a hard couple of days, but not a surgeon, right? Who's going back to work. But and then the second job he had, where the doctor said that he literally put his hands over Duntsch's in the middle of the surgery and said, "What are you doing?" Like, had to stop him from killing the patient or whatever. So, obviously something was very wrong with him.
Right. Yeah. He just made poor choices, right? Doctors, they know, a surgeon knows, you don't leave a patient who you've just operated on because there could be complications. You may have to come back in and, deal with something that has come up. And you certainly don't leave them without, if you do have to leave, then you call somebody to take over the case for you. And so just his inability to do simple things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or in the surgery that you mentioned, that doctor testified for us, and he was trying to operate in a pool of blood. He couldn't see what he was doing, but he said he could do it by feel.
Yeah.
And that's just crazy. Everybody hears that's like, you cannot do back surgery
Right.
by feel, so it's just things that seem very basic to even the normal person, layperson, you and I, who don't know how to do surgery. It seems absurd.
Well, uh, he couldn't tell the difference between the vertebra, the spinal cord, and the muscle outside of it when he's looking at a live X-ray. So I kind of doubt he could do that by feel.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
He didn't have those skills.
So you told me something that's really stuck with me because, all of the civil cases against him, he thought that was just a vast conspiracy by a bunch of, crooked lawyers or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he never could realize, oh my gosh. And we had really good medical experts. I'm sure he read those reports. No, they're wrong. Right? But you told me that during the trial, you felt like for the first time that maybe he was like, yeah, I get it. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I think I don't know exactly at what point in the trial it was, but we were told that he, throughout most of the trial, was still in denial that he had really caused this harm to the patients. He heard from the doctors who treated them afterwards. He heard from the patients themselves. He obviously saw expert reports. I mean, there was a ton of stuff leading up to this, and he sat there and listened to the testimony. But we were told that it wasn't until Dr. Lazar testified and took the stand and really laid it out entirely on all of the different patients in a row that he even began to realize, oh, maybe I did something wrong here. And I think that's very telling, right? Again, of where he was mentally, just not believing that he could have caused any harm, that these things were not really his fault. And then we were told that was the point where he actually began to accept, oh, maybe I did do something here.
So this would be like, as you and I know, well, we both know and love Dr. Lazar.
Yes.
And he's a very senior level, very experienced, very credible neurosurgeon here. And so you think it was kind of Duntsch listening to somebody who could have been a professor of his or something like that, and they were speaking the same language, neurosurgeon to neurosurgeon.
Yeah, I think that's some of it, but also, Dr. Lazar is really good at, I hate to say it, but like dumbing it down for the rest of us, making it seem simple, and maybe he needed to hear it that way too. I don't know exactly what it was, but something about Dr. Lazar really struck him as, oh, this guy's telling the truth.
Well, Dr. Lazar has been very good about dumbing things down for me as well.
Yes.
I remember one of my clients, I was in Dr. Lazar's office, and he said, do you know what a Cariston rongeur is? And I was like, I think so, or whatever. And he's like, hold on. And he pulls it out or whatever. And he said, this is what we use to nip away pieces of bone. Like if you had on your vertebra, if you had a bone spur or something like that. I said, oh, yeah, okay, I know what that is. He said, the problem is with your client, he was using the Cariston rongeur to nip away pieces of your client's spinal cord.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I think we can all wrap our heads around the fact that that is absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's painful to even think about, right? You've got this piece of equipment that's supposed to be breaking bone, chipping a bone, and instead we're taking out the spinal cord, which is so delicate.
And a patient wakes up paralyzed, and Duntsch is like, well, I did nothing wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, another thing that you said that I want to follow up on that I think is fascinating. And the way I've come to say it is there's only one reason that more patients weren't maimed or killed. And that's because Duntsch was new. He was building his practice, and he just didn't have a big book of patients. And, as a prosecutor with the power of a criminal subpoena, you were able to get more information than we were, the civil lawyers. And I made a chart out of some of the things that you found out because you knew how many surgeries he did at each facility and how many people were injured. And it was like, there were 3 procedures performed at facility X, 3 people injured. But
Yeah.
injured isn't the right word, maimed or killed.
Yeah.
Permanently disabled or killed. 12 procedures here, 12 over 12. To the extent you can tell us, how did you develop that evidence and why?
Well, we subpoenaed, right? I think we sent out, my investigators sent over 800 subpoenas out, just trying to gather all the information on all the patients. And the hospitals in Dallas where he had operated, we just ordered all the records of every single patient. We said, give us every patient he ever operated on at this facility. And they did. And so we went through those and made a list of all the patients in order. We called every single patient and talked to them, how are you doing? What's happening? Who are your doctors now? And ultimately what we figured out is there were only 3 that were okay. The rest had all been injured. A lot of them, there were probably about 10 that had to have repeat surgeries with him alone, and then, more surgeries after that. And we are very lucky that it was early in his career and he hadn't built a big book and before he got stopped, because it could have been a lot worse.
I may not be recalling this right, but I think the 3 surgeries where there were no injuries, he literally was making an incision and going and taking out a spinal cord stimulator. I may not be remembering that right, but a few of the things that he did were just like, it'd be really hard to botch that.
Yeah.
But
some were really minor, and they were very early in his career. So like right at the beginning, maybe, I don't know, maybe somebody was sitting with him in those surgeries, or maybe they were super simple, or maybe he wasn't taking risks and using drugs during those surgeries. I don't know. Or those people just got lucky. They really did.
Another thing that's interesting to me is there are people out there who think that other people are litigious. They're lawsuit hungry. People and lawyers are just looking to file these frivolous lawsuits or whatever. But there were a lot of people who did not come forward and hire a lawyer and sue him. That was surprising to me in a sense, because it was all over the news. Everybody knew, I think.
I would say probably half, maybe less than half, actually ended up filing a lawsuit. Some of the other patients who we didn't put on at our trial and maybe who hadn't filed lawsuits, some of them said to me, I'm injured. Here's the problems I'm having. But other people were hurt so bad, I don't think it's worth putting my case on. So they didn't even want their case to be part of the criminal trial, not because they didn't believe in it, but because they felt like the other people were hurt so bad that's where the focus needed to be, and so that's kind of how we tailored it down. And I'm sure that's what you saw on the other side with the lawsuits too, is some of those patients maybe just thought it could have been a lot worse.
True. Yeah. And by the time some people found out that it was really a Duntsch problem and not what they believed, like, well, I just had a bad outcome.
Right.
It was too late. Statute of limitations.
That's true. Yeah.
But, well, I want to talk about one other important thing, and we're going to get into this in subsequent episodes. But in Texas, for sure, it's very, very somewhere between difficult and impossible to hold a hospital liable for credentialing a physician, putting a physician on staff, or failing to kick them off the staff and report them to the medical board and the data bank so that they don't go to the next hospital and keep hurting people. But there's strict privileges in Texas concerning the accessibility of what the hospital knew, when they knew it, what they did about it, if anything. You were able to get that information with a criminal subpoena, is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And I don't know how much you can say about it or not say about it, but what were you able to gather as a result of the information you had access to?
Well, we really wanted that information because we wanted to know what he knew. Had he lied to these hospitals? What is he putting in these records as far as what his background is? And with looking for that information, it opened a lot of other doors for us. But we were also looking for that. We wanted to know what the doctor was saying in the peer review. Because I don't want to go into a trial saying he did these terrible things that are unheard of when there's doctors at the hospital who are saying, "Oh no, this is normal."
Mhm.
And so we want that information too, which is why we wanted those peer review files, which most people can't get. Just kind of another perspective on what happened with each patient.
Mhm.
And within those records, we were able to see that it was terrible. I mean, it was not good for Duntsch, the things that they were saying about him, and not him personally, but the work that he had done,
Mhm.
that these patients were severely injured, and basically that it was unexcusable.
So interestingly, Duntsch did not have one single physician come to defend the care that he rendered to these patients. He had one neurosurgeon, a very prominent local neurosurgeon that came and testified on his behalf, but it wasn't to defend his care.
Right. Yeah. No, it was not. And I think the guy that they hired is an fantastic. He's an expert. He's great at these things, and he knew you can't defend the medicine, right? You
Mhm.
can't defend what Duntsch did in these surgeries, and so the defense take instead was we're going to blame other people.
Mhm.
So they blamed the hospitals for allowing, him to keep practicing and for not giving him the things that he needed. They blamed his training program. They said, well, he must not have trained him well enough because he clearly didn't know how to do these things. Their main take on it was just like, it's okay, yeah, he messed them up, but it's everybody else's fault.
Yeah. That's very, very interesting approach. And you and I have talked about this before, but it was kind of interesting to me that he didn't try to kind of fall on the sword and say, I was sick and I was suffering from a drug addiction or a mental illness or alcoholism or whatever. And oh my gosh, I needed help. And I didn't realize what I was doing because I was sick. But he didn't take that approach.
No, he didn't. And honest, I never really thought that he would. Again, it goes back to his mentality, right? His belief that he did great things. So I never thought that he would take the stand and say, "Oh, yes, I messed this up," because that's not what he'd said in his police interviews. He said that they were fine. He did not mess anything up.
Right.
And I did think he would take the stand, though. I thought that he would get up there and try to talk his way out of it, either explain the medicine, explain what had happened, say that it was, a possible complication. I thought that he would believe that he would be able to talk his way out of it because he had done that a lot. He could be very, patients told us that he could be very charismatic. He talked really well, and he was just able to articulate all sorts of information that maybe wasn't true, but it sounded really good.
Mhm.
And so that's what I really thought they would present at trial, is that he would get up there and do that.
Mhm.
I didn't think that his own attorneys would be able to keep him off the stand.
Yeah.
But he did not take the stand.
Yeah. Well, he never got a chance to explain in the civil cases either. I deposed him, and he pled the Fifth Amendment privilege, against self-incrimination to all of my questions. But I could tell he was chomping at the bit. His lawyers were like, plead the fifth, plead the fifth. But, that narcissism, I could tell that he was like, let me just explain this to you.
Yeah.
But.
And obviously it's probably better for him that he did take the fifth. But that's again the police interview where he did not. He talked to our detective, and he explained a lot of things to the detective about how he believed the surgeries had gone and what this was really all about.
Yeah, that's right. Well, in closing, do you have any idea what Duntsch is doing in prison these days? Do you get reports or anything like that?
We don't really get reports. Certain circumstances will allow us to find out. Last I'd heard, he was doing laundry down there, but other than that, I haven't heard anything. So
he's not operating on
not operating on anyone.
Maybe even the prison wouldn't let him operate.
He might be giving out some free advice, though. To
probably legal advice and medical advice, because Well, Michelle, it's just been a pleasure to have you here, and kind of a good excuse to see you in person and not on Zoom. And thank you for being you, and keep on fighting the good fight for all of us.
Well, thank you. And I mean, we couldn't have done it without you and everybody who was a part of this. So thank you for continuing to advocate. You really help keep things going. And it's so important for everybody. Everybody's a patient, like you always say. Everybody's a patient. Everybody's families are patients. And you're the one who says that, and it's true. And so, thank you for continuing to advocate for everyone.
Thank you for saying that. And we're all in this together, so we may as well try to get some changes done.
Yeah, try and get it right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michelle.
Thanks.
Much appreciated.